Wow. Well, thank you, Dr. Huber and the Lincoln University Choir, Ms. Candace Ingram, Mr. Nolly Moore. This has been a great program. Amen. But we have something special that we want to share with you this evening. And so at this time, I'm not going to introduce him because he can speak for himself. We're going to introduce Mr. Scott Wilson and Dr. Mike Piniella.
Hi. It wasn't that long ago we were here, shooting Nobody Plays Like Boone for the State Historical Society of Missouri in the Mohip Theater, and learned a lot about Blind Boone and John Lang. And during that, I had heard, I've lived in Columbia since '84, and I had no idea that this lynching had occurred in Columbia. And so it was suggested that I read Doug Hunt's essay in the Missouri Review called A Course in Applied Lynching. And after I read that essay, I was like, really here? And so in doing research and wanting to educate myself and learn more about it, Christine Montgomery from the State Historical Society of Missouri, we had talked, and she emailed me Mr. Scott's death certificate. And the death certificate read, cause of death, lynching or hung by angry mob. The contributory section of the death certificate said committed rape. And I said, well, how can you say the man committed rape? Because that's a legal term, that's not a slang term. How can you do that how can you say that in a legal document when he was denied due process and was murdered before he ever stood trial? So I made a copy of it and went around to family and friends. I met with Doug Hunt. I met with Reverend Ruffin. And is this something, is everyone on the same page, or is this right? I mean, not right, but am I seeing this correctly? Everyone said, it's not right. So then after that, what's the process to change the death certificate, if it can even be changed or not? So I contacted my friend Gary Stamper. He's an attorney in town. I shot it to him. He said, this is not right. I will, if it needs to go to court, I will represent and pro bono for free for the public. And he said, well, we need to get someone on board from the medical examiner's office. And so I contacted the medical examiner's office, and that's where I was introduced to Dr. Michael Piniella. And Michael, would you want to come up? And we got together, and you came up with a game plan.
We did. We did. I first, when I heard this story, Scott told me, I was just shocked. Kimberly and I had just moved from Pittsburgh, or from South Carolina. We're originally from Pittsburgh. And we were just absolutely shocked in a town dedicated towards education, a college town. How could this be? Also, not only as a medical examiner, as a physician, I'm also an attorney licensed in Tennessee, and as an attorney, no way. There was no way that in this community that what I saw in that death certificate was proper. And so we talked, we made some phone calls. I realized that this was going to be a little more difficult in the sense that this was almost 80-some years ago. And talking over with the Bureau of Vital Records at Jeff City, realized that we certainly did have the jurisdiction as medical examiners with Mr. Scott's death occurring within Columbia, that we had a right and an obligation to change the death certificate. Because it doesn't take much. I mean, as a medical examiner, I see man's inhumanity to man on a frequent basis. And it's just a gut reaction. And when I saw that death certificate, I said, this was done solely for one purpose, and that was to justify an unjust and heinous act. So working with the Bureau of Vital Records, I realized that I could submit an affidavit basically crossing out the committed rape. And we had talked about whether or not to potentially go and to completely remove the death certificate and issue a new one, in which case then, since it's a public document, we would have to go through the court to get a public record taken out of the records. And, you know, we had talked about the historical significance of this and also just to serve as a marker for history to say what happened and how in the 21st century as a community, there's no way that we were going to let this stand and we were going to fight this. So the decision was made to basically retrieve the old death certificate, which didn't need a court order, to have the committed rape stricken out and to below that to emphasize strongly that Mr. Scott was never tried nor convicted of rape. And the other thing that was a glaring thing that was not put on the death certificate is the manner of death. And for a manner of death, basically, it's either for a death, as a medical examiner, we rule it either a death as a natural, an accidental, a suicide, a homicide, or undetermined. And in Mr. Scott's case, for that original death certificate, it was not at all marked in terms of the manner, which once again showed me that it was just a real trying to cover up a horrific act. So with the help of the Bureau of Vital Records and also the state's archive, we changed it not only to put down or just strike out committed rape, but also to put never tried or convicted, but we also marked the death as a homicide, which it was. And this basically, I was very moved, and I think the citizens of this fine state should be very proud of the government administration offices that we worked with. When we said basically the importance of this and what needed to be done, Scott, it was no matter than less than probably a month with some phone calls, them working very quickly, because you can imagine they had to basically take and find that old death certificate. And once they got it, they sent from the archives, it had to be sent back over to the Bureau of Vital Records, at which time then the corrections were made and then it was sent back to the state archives. And I was very moved by the gentleman at the State of Archives when I called him to say, this is coming back to you. And he says, yes, we've already received it and I'm going to expedite it. I can't make any guarantees that we'll get it on the net and on public display within the next week, but we're going to work very, very quickly. 2 hours later, I got a call back, and he says it's already on the net. So it was a team effort, and I think everybody is aware and certainly quite moved by the need as a state document to accurately reflect the horrific act that occurred and to emphasize that this man was never tried nor convicted and was unjustly hung by a mob.
To give you an idea how fast this worked with Dr. Piniella here, I introduced myself to him on August 31st. Cold call. Hi, got this. Can this happen? And by October 22nd, it was already changed and on the net. That's how fast it worked. Thanks, Dr. Piniella. I'll put this in the dining room and so you all can look at it.